Hello, hello. Welcome to Your Home by Design, the podcast where we talk all about our homes and how they affect our health and well-being. Some episodes we delve deep into the research and some we just chat. I'm Nico, an interior designer and researcher passionate about bringing forward the findings so that you can improve your lifestyle and well-being. Grateful to have you. Let's do this. Hello, welcome to this week's episode. Today we're going to chat about kitchen design. I'm going to share what makes for good kitchen design, from functionality to aesthetics to even how certain things in your kitchen can affect your health. We're going to talk about some of the key decisions to make when designing your kitchen. And I'm also going to share some simple things you can do to update, even if you're not planning a major reno. So welcome to today's episode. Let's get started. So what are some key decisions to make and things to consider and factor in when designing your kitchen? And really, I can't cover them all today, or seriously, this episode would have been several hours, but I have condensed it down a little for you. So the first thing is the importance of creating a functional kitchen. So what is a functional kitchen? Well, to put it simply, it's a kitchen that works. It works for you and how you need it to. And there's some important things that work for all of us in general, and some that are very specific to our individual needs. So it's important when creating a functional kitchen to address the function first. It's so easy and enticing to go to the fun stuff, which is how it's going to look, right? Like the backsplash and the countertop and the stone and the cabinet details. But you have to start with how you need it to support you in how you use the space. One of the biggest things to consider in creating a functional kitchen is the layout. You have to start with the layout. You know, if you're renovating and you're able to start from kind of like a blank canvas, so to speak, then it's important to look at how the layout of the room can be improved. You know, it can be easy to go with a layout that's similar to what was there simply because it's sort of easy to envision, right? You've already seen it. You know that it more or less works. So you kind of get fixated. And often for plumbing, it can be the easiest approach, but I think it's really worth exploring and pushing how you can improve upon what was there. So really looking at it from all angles, right? Things like, you know, does it work better for you to have the fridge on a different wall to get more counter space? You know, really thinking through the space and going through many, many scenarios. You know, and if you have the square footage, are you going to opt for a larger island or say a secondary kitchen or a walk-in pantry or like a butler's pantry? These are all important because they come down to how you will use the space. So often people who entertain like having a secondary kitchen or a butler's pantry. You know, these are used so that you can do some of the cooking or food prep and it's kind of tucked away from view while you're entertaining. So basically like the mess is hidden from view, the messiness, and isn't in view of your guests. You can enjoy the space and it's not cluttered and doesn't feel like a mad visual frenzy. And where is the best placement for your cooktop or your range? You know, do you want it on your island? If you think family or friends will gather at the island, then you might want to consider having it on another run of counters. But playing around with the placement of the three sort of major components, your fridge, your cooktop or range, and your sink. You know, these three things are what makes up what's known as the work triangle. And you've probably heard of the work triangle. There are some who really, really like to stick within this work triangle and others who kind of ignore it altogether. So to give you a little work triangle backstory, the idea behind this was that the three objects, the sink, the cooktop, and the fridge, are close enough without being too close to ensure that the kitchen is easy and efficient to use and that one can move around quickly enough. So it was actually devised to save on time when performing tasks and moving from one place to the next. And it was also devised to save on costs. And this had to do with standardizing construction. So even though the reason for this in terms of time saving and cost, you know, maybe something we have all kind of adapted into design and may not be really that crucial for you personally. it's important to take this triangle into consideration, because let's say you're taking a pot of hot water off of the cooktop and then going to your sink to dump it. You have to walk, if you had to walk all the way around, say a really large island to a sink on the opposite side of the room, well, then yes, getting to that sink faster would feel pretty crucial. And the overall functionality of the space wouldn't be as good. So even though you can get creative and stretch the triangle and make the distances a little bit further apart, or even add an additional sink, the work triangle is still an important piece of the puzzle to consider. And I will touch on hygiene in a few minutes, because there are some interesting studies done on contamination in relation to the work triangle, but I'll get to that. So yes, things have to be at a certain comfortable distance. You will want to play around with, if I put my sink here, then where would I put the range and the fridge? Does this work? What if I put my sink here instead? Then where would I put the range and the fridge? What if I put my fridge here? Then where would I put my sink and my range? So you go over all the scenarios with all the major fixtures and fittings. You see what I mean? It's really about playing around with it until you get it right for how you like to cook, entertain, and move around the kitchen. In general, not to mention how that room relates to the adjacent or connected spaces. So that's an important piece as well. So for instance, where do you come in and go out of the room? If you're bringing groceries into the room, where are you putting them down? Or what do you see when you look from the sofa in the room next to the kitchen? If you want your backsplash to be a focal point, then that's an important consideration. Things like, even your tech center, and do you have charging docks, or the infamous drop zone in the kitchen where things just seem to land and stay and clutter. These are all really important things to think through, and you want to observe how you use your current kitchen and what are your frustrations in your current kitchen, because those are the things that's going to inform how you make changes in the new kitchen. These are all the things that you have to factor into your floor plan, starting with the work triangle. If you have a really large kitchen, it may not make sense for these three things to be close together. In this case, perhaps you should look at, as I mentioned, a secondary sink, like a prep sink. So there are always exceptions to the rule, but it really comes down to how you need the kitchen to perform and to function for your needs, and what are the things that aggravate you. And just in general, how are you going to use the space? On a day-to-day basis, how are you going to use your space? The second key decision and thing to factor in is lighting. First of all, there just has to be enough lighting. You really need to cover all areas of lighting, from general, which is the overall light levels that help to maximize your visibility, to task, which is what you need to, say, bake in your kitchen or cut veggies, to ambiance, especially if you entertain or your kitchen is connected to another room, or you just dimming down your lights at night, right? The ambiance at night to create a relaxing environment. I mean, imagine if you didn't address ambient lighting and you had the room next to your kitchen, all chilled out, and then you went to get a drink, and it's like someone turning a light on when you're sleeping. It's a shock to the system. And think about other things too, like all of the ways you use lighting and how you can get creative with interesting lighting, whether that be for task or for general or ambient. So for task lighting, can you mount a light, a sconce on the wall that has directional lighting? There's really interesting things that you can do to kind of up the design, and think about under cabinet lighting, or lighting that's on sensors that comes on when you open a cabinet. So it's a really nice thing to be able to control your light levels and to have that ability to kind of carve out the atmosphere as you need it. So if you're in the middle of cooking, you're going to want those lights bright so you're able to see. Whereas in the evening, or if you have guests over, you might want to dim it down and make it feel really, really calm and inviting. And the aesthetic of how your lights look. So not just what the lights do, but how they look. This is one area that can have a lot of design impact. You can make them very architectural and sleek or really eclectic. You can play with color and shape here. So lighting in a kitchen is a huge consideration in the design. And I think it's something that can be overlooked and not explored as extensively as perhaps it could be. The third key decision and thing to factor is your storage. And I want to mention this because there are some really there's so many creative ways to utilize and design storage, from things like appliance garages to open shelving to hidden pantry closets to even improving upon the dreaded lazy Susan. There are just better racks for those awkward little corners, and you can really get creative here and customize things here, and really there's just a ton of great options. So make sure if you're looking for the ways that you are going to like racking and stuff, right? There's a lot of different options for racking. So really explore the many ways that you can utilize good storage. Drawers, more drawers. They're very useful and very functional. Even if you have to, from a design perspective, say you have to go with cupboards on your lowers, and you can still add pull-out shelves. So internal drawers, so you have access to the back easily. And you really need to think through what you store. So how many things do you need to house? Do you have a lot of baking dishes? Because certain things call for certain heights or certain widths. Or a certain quantity of a particular size of drawer, right? Do you host and have a lot of wine glasses? And maybe your wine glasses are varying heights, so you have to factor that in when you're determining how many shelves you need to house your wine glasses. Or is there anything you'd like to display? Do you have any precious things or things that you love? Because that might determine whether you have a cupboard that has glass instead. If you're going to store these precious things and you want to display them in a way that's visible in a cabinet versus on an open shelf. So you're thinking through those things. And, another thing is hidden niches. They're great for things like spices and oils and the things that often sit out and clutter the countertop. So the last thing I'm going to talk about, the last sort of key decision and things to factor in. And like I said, there are so many, and I have kind of condensed it down today. But the last ones I'm going to talk about is what contributes to impact, because design impact is so important, especially in a kitchen, and there's so many things that contribute to the overall impact of the space. So, you have so many areas, right, that can influence this. And they all need to be considered alone and together collectively. So things like your backsplash, the color, the texture, the pattern, the shape, the height of your backsplash. Your backsplash can be a focal point, especially if you run it to the ceiling, or if you add a floating shelf, and if you can't take it to the ceiling and you want to make the room feel higher, then you think about going with a tone that's similar to your upper cabinet so that there's no obvious break. And it doesn't have to be the same material, obviously. It's just we're talking about the tones. So keeping a tone that's consistent, whether it's slightly lighter or slightly darker, you're going to want those to be very tonal so that your eye is drawn up. And a backsplash is that one thing, just so you know, that you can typically update fairly easily down the road. So I've had people that have gone super, super conservative with their backsplash when they wanted to try something, even if it was a slightly different pattern on a tile. And they were just really concerned because they're like, oh, I don't know, this feels really sort of out there for me. And they've talked themselves out of it. And those are the kind of decisions that when you tone something down, when you might want to perhaps, amp it up, those are the things that really set the mood and set the tone, set the atmosphere for the kitchen. So, think about that. If you're feeling a little bit conservative, about a choice, but perhaps deep down, you really do want to do something interesting or different for you. You got to weigh that and see that it might have a really great impact on the room. And your flooring, if it's stone or wood, if it's tile that looks like wood, the pattern on the floor, is it a larger scale pattern to what your backsplash is? Then you have your cabinet colors from, which wood and stain to painted aspects. Is it a flat paint or is it gloss? And what kind of detail is in the wood or the cabinet, the paneling of the door. There's so many different door faces, the profiles that you can do. So really kind of getting familiar with what's out there and learning about what options you have for different looks of cabinetry. And what type of countertop, from the materiality to the color. It's so important to understand if the material has any limitations, like if it stains easily or if it needs to be resealed every so often. If you like veining and you really want to make a statement, are you going to book match, which is mirroring the pattern or the vein? If you have a large run. So each one of these decisions contributes hugely to the overall design. And when I say you have to choose them alone and then you have to choose them collectively, I mean, you have to think through each choice, and then you have to really look at how these choices come together and make the changes so that everything kind of works together. As Charles Eames once said, the details are not the details, they make the design. So every choice you make adds to the overall impact of the space. Every detail that you include or exclude is going to impact this. So now I just want to share some facts and findings. So first, what are ways a kitchen can actually affect your health and well-being? Like if you're really thinking about it, what do you think might contribute to this? For you personally, if you're redesigning your space or you're thinking about it, or you're just analyzing your current kitchen, what do you think? What are some improvements you think you could make, or what are some changes you think you could make that could boost your health and your well-being? Because I think in general, the kitchen often can be kind of overlooked when someone thinks about how to create a home that boosts your well-being. Someone might think first about home gyms or mini wellness areas, or, creating a really serene, relaxing bedroom, or they're just thinking about your overall aesthetic from room to room. And although these are all really important, and especially under the sort of umbrella of aesthetic, there are so many things and choices you can make that contribute to your health and your well-being. Just alone, the field of neuroaesthetics is an amazing study on how our aesthetical environment impacts us in these ways. And while, of course, all of what I just mentioned are very crucial in home health, the kitchen is certainly one place that does also have impact. So I'm going to go over 4 areas of impact here. And the first one is ergonomics. The next one is aesthetics. The third one is contamination. And the fourth one is eating habits. So the first one is ergonomics. So basically, it's how efficient things are for you, your body measurement for things like reach, and when you're performing tasks, those sorts of things. So what are some things that you might want to consider or think about in relation to ergonomics? And I know we already talked about this, but storage, we talked about storage from a design perspective, but not in terms of an ergonomic perspective. So your storage, this is an important one, because when we look at ergonomics, things like your drawers, your pullouts, your organizers, these are all things that contribute to that, because you want to limit the amount of bending and stretching. You want to reduce the strain to make being in that room less taxing on your body and more enjoyable. If you have poor kitchen ergonomics, you might experience, bad posture. Because, when you're sitting at the countertop or if the counter heights are wrong or your seat heights are wrong, when dining, it can contribute to this. You're not sitting upright, right? You might be sort of crouching a little bit and poor ergonomics can increase your levels of stress as well, because if the room doesn't function well and you're having a hard time finding things or even getting to things, or even you're seeing a lot of clutter. I mean, this is going to cause you emotional stress. And oftentimes, these are the things that we just kind of live with and we don't really notice. So I do encourage you to really pay attention to this. And as you're moving through your current kitchen or think back to past kitchens and things that really bothered you, like really, really dive deep here and give it some time and think about it, because this is just going to inform you in the ways that you need to make changes. And it really can, if you address the ergonomics, it can make being in your kitchen that much better. The second one is aesthetics, because, as I said, we often think about when we're thinking about creating a home that supports your health and your well-being, you might sort of think about how the home looks overall, like the vibe. So, I love like airy and white, or I like it to feel very serene and spa-like. And, so you're thinking about the overall aesthetic. You're not necessarily thinking about each component that's going to create that overall aesthetic, but you're thinking about it from like a 30,000 foot view kind of thing. So we often think about that in terms of our home, other areas in the home. But if we're looking at the kitchen, the aesthetical space of a kitchen is so important in boosting your happiness and your well-being, simply by being delighted in your surroundings. If you walk into your kitchen and you love that room, if you walk into the kitchen and you don't see clutter, if you walk into that kitchen and it looks organized or it looks inviting, the lighting is right, the colors are right, the details are right, and you start noticing these details and then that brings you joy, this will enhance your overall feelings of happiness. So creating an aesthetically inviting, pleasing, exciting kitchen is a part of it as well. So don't overlook your kitchen in this area, because even though kitchens can be, every kitchen has countertops, every kitchen has cupboards, every kitchen has drawers, every kitchen has hardware, every kitchen has a fridge, has a stove, has a microwave, has it's like every single kitchen typically has, a reasonable amount of the same things in it. So I think because of that, people can almost feel that it's not a place that you can add that real aesthetic value. And you absolutely can. So think about this. Think about how you can use your kitchen to really boost your happiness just simply by being delighted in your surroundings. The third one I'm going to talk about is contamination. So there was a study done on cross-contamination and the distance needed to limit that. So, and this study does talk about the work triangle. And basically, this study concluded that the bigger the distance to the sink, the more chances of cross-contamination. And it talked about the more actions, like after touching raw food, like opening a fridge or drawers or checking your phone, and hand cleaning done by using a cloth to wipe instead of washing with soap and water. So this is important when you're thinking about the sink distance. You want to be able to quickly and easily get there to wash your hands through meal prep and cooking repeatedly. Because this is the only thing that's really going to cut down on cross-contamination. And the fourth thing we're going to talk about is eating habits. This is there was a really interesting study done several years ago that looked at how if we have a messy kitchen combined with feeling stress, then it could lead to unhealthy snacking. So if you look around and your kitchen is a disaster, or even if it's just a bit unorganized and you are also feeling stress, not necessarily caused from the mess, although that can cause stress, as we've talked about. But let's say that just you come home from work and you've had a crummy day and you're just feeling stressed from it, then this combination could lead to unhealthy snacking. And there was also another study done that I've actually talked about in a past episode, but where they looked at the quantity of food consumed from people in a closed dining room compared to an open plan, so open to the kitchen dining area. And they found that the ones in the closed dining room where they could see the food, where they couldn't see the food, ate less. So whereas eating in an open concept kitchen, you can see the food and it's right there. It's very convenient. It can potentially cause you to serve more and eat more, and even just be there more. You're taking more trips there. So I thought that was really interesting because our eating habits can be affected by the space that we're in and our emotional state when we walk into the space in conjunction with seeing a mess. So the last thing I want to share with you today is some tips on what you might want to update and upgrade if you're doing a small refresh. Because let's face it, not everyone is in the market to do an overhaul, but you still want your kitchen to function and feel and look great. Or maybe you're thinking about doing a major reno down the road, but often making a few changes before taking on a reno can actually add years to your kitchen. So while you're going through the process of budgeting and figuring it out, you may decide that you want to just refresh it up a little bit for the time being. So here are a few ways you can upgrade to add impact and freshen things up. And, and these aren't necessarily in order of importance. So the first thing is to upgrade your lighting. If you have an island or a peninsula with pendant lights, you could change them out to something more current and impactful. Or if you have walls where you could add some lighting, some sconces, that would really help to elevate the room. So adding some additional lighting or changing existing lighting would really, really help. It would really impact the space. And lighting is something you can create an ambiance with, as we've talked about, and it can be a focal point, right? You can introduce some materiality to an otherwise hard surface space. And of course, task lighting is crucial, as we've talked about, because to state the obvious, when you're cooking and you're cutting and everything like that. But I would say that this is one main area where you absolutely can add some interest. And often if you're just looking at doing changing out your pendant lights are a great place to start, or adding some form of wall lighting. So yeah, and the next thing is to paint out your cabinetry. The saying, a little paint goes a long way. Well, it's true. And you don't have to paint out the entire kitchen either. You could paint just the lowers or the upper cabinetry or the island if you have one. And, a little tip is to just pay attention to how much is going on in the room already. Because if you're doing a refresh, you're not changing everything. So if you decide to paint your cabinetry, you've got to really pay attention to what else is happening. So if you say have really busy countertops or really fussy details in your cabinetry or architectural elements, you want to tone those down. In some cases, you're not trying to add to your space. You're actually trying to almost like take away from it, right? So choosing a tone of paint color that is going to work really well with what's already existing, not compete with it or not really add to it if those details that you have are a little much. And also, as another option, there are great companies out there where you can order pre-made doors and drawer fronts. So think about that, keeping your existing boxes and just updating the fronts. Painting can be a big job, especially if you're doing it yourself. If you're bringing somebody else in, it can be, it's not inexpensive. So just consider the option of replacing those doors and drawer fronts. if you really want the biggest bang for your buck. The next thing is to switch out your hardware. Hardware, which is, knobs and handles and pulls, are kind of like jewelry in the kitchen. They add that last little touch, that last little detail. And there's so many options available that really do range in price. So don't feel stuck with the hardware that your kitchen currently has. When I first started out as a designer, there were not nearly as many great, inexpensive hardware options. So lucky you. The last thing that I want to say, if you're really just looking to do a refresh, never underestimate the simple things you can do. Simple things like adding art to placements, adding things like a statement tray. These are such small things, small and inexpensive things. So for instance, if you're a tea or a coffee drinker, think about placing everything on a tray. I have a tray in our kitchen that has our ground coffee, a container, our tea bags, our tea kettle. So when you put things on a tray, it feels more purposeful and intentional, and it's just more special. So and something like this can be a little nod to like a hotel-like experience. So think about that. Even arranging a few vases on your island with beautiful flowers. Start thinking about all the ways you can do a quick little refresh without having to do a complete overhaul. So when you freshen things up, it really freshens you up as well as your outlook on the room. So never underestimate the effects of putting extra love into a room and doing some minor upgrades before a big reno. So you can see how important the kitchen is and how impactful to your life it can be. If you really take the time to be critical about these things and to investigate what the right choices are for you to get the results you want, then you will be creating a better space for you and one that will impact your overall health and well-being. The kitchen should not be overlooked when you're considering these things. Thank you for listening to today's episode.
Thanks so much for listening today. If you found this episode helpful, the best way to support the show is to follow along and share it with someone who'd love it too. And if you'd like to go a step further, you can become one of our Better Living backers. It's a small monthly contribution that helps keep the show going. And as a thank you, I'll send you a personal note along with a 15% discount for the Create Space course when it launches. You can find the Support the Show link right in the show notes. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for creating space with me.